driving up North Street, and it was probably late October, and I hadn't quite focused on it yet. I'd been expecting it, but suddenly a gust of wind blew the leaves of trees off of both sides of the road, and then it created like this kind of swirl of wind in the middle, and as I was driving, all of these leaves of magical colors fell on my car. And I'm used to, up till last year, I'm used to leaves just staying green all year, or just the tree not having any, and that's the way the tree likes to be. And it's one or the other, but this was happening, and some of them were like yellow. That's my favorite, actually, the really, really bright yellow ones. Completely new to me. I'd never seen anything like that. Like when the sun hits the tree from behind, it looks like an angel tree with a halo behind it, and some were orange, and some were a bright red. Some of them were like a deep purple. I never imagined that those could be. And they were all like swirling in the road, and so I put the right song on so it felt right. And I didn't even stop where I was supposed to. I just kept going and going and going. That night I came back from Maine, and I just thought, like, this is great. And then suddenly, like we came to Thanksgiving, and they all started to go away, and it was one of those like, why God moment, like God ruins things, right? He did this cool thing, and then it happened again this year. I'd seen it once, but even seeing it the second time was pretty incredible. And then Thanksgiving came, and now they look like that, and like that, like, what is God doing? Why does he do this sort of thing to the beautiful trees? And so, to something like, that's my starting question. Why did you all drag me out here to just? Oh, and in spring, don't even get me started on spring. But I've seen that once. But why does that happen to the trees? Why does he let me drive around for 3 weeks in heaven and then just cast me down into the pits of barrenness? Why does he do that? Yes. So he's teaching me a lesson. I'm an ungrateful California yuppie, and I need to appreciate this fall every single time. Why does that happen every year to these trees? What would happen if it didn't happen? Yeah, they're getting ready for winter because there's a cycle, right? They're being renewed. Winter comes and things happen in the earth that I don't understand. And then after winter, like spring comes and more things happen in the earth and life springs up, right? And then summer comes and it becomes super, super sticky around here. And then fall, and then it happens over and over. And if that didn't happen, without that constant renewal, there wouldn't be any life. It's the constant renewal that brings life. And so here's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at two Bible texts because I think that they're both really, really important for the Jesus Advent Christmas narrative. And one of them's in Luke, one of them's in Matthew. And you guys know how typically I go super long with just one. Well, today we're doing two, but we're going to merge them. And the easiest way to go is I think we're going to do like one side. I'm really happy you all have your Bibles in hand. One side is going to look at Luke. So I think we'll do, now let's do Luke over here. Let's have this side. Luke chapter 1. Crack them open. And if by chance you forgot your Bible at home today, like, isolated incident, there's a Bible in the pew in front of you. And over here, let's look at Matthew. And I know nobody here forgot it. Let's look at Matthew chapter 1. The balcony, well, you guys can just read whatever you'd like. And in the choir, you guys probably have them both memorized. So you don't need to turn. But we're going to treat both of them. And so I'm actually going to use two stands, because I'm going to have both open in front of me. Liza, I'm going to take that away from you. Sorry. We're going to use two stands. So you guys crack open to there. And we're going to start. Let's go to the Matthew text first. You guys probably know both stories fairly well. Let's go Matthew text first. If you look in the Matthew text, chapter 1, verse 18, you will see that you get introduced to Mary. Now, the biggest difference between the two stories is that the central character is one or the other of Jesus' parents. The Luke text is going to focus much more on Mary. The Matthew text focuses much more on Joseph. So we're going to look at these two characters. And if you look here in the very, very early part of verse 18, you already see Mary was pledged to be married to a man named Joseph. And if you look at the counterpart verse in Luke, it's actually verse 26 and 27. Would you read those for me? 26 and 27 of Luke. You guys, oh no, I switched it. Okay, then you stay where you are. Carrie, would you read 26 and 27 of Luke? So what do we know so far? I mean, we've got in Matthew, her name is Mary. She's engaged to a man named Joseph. And over here, what did we learn? Her name is Mary. She's a virgin, and she's engaged to a man named Joseph. How does the story start us out? What does it lay down right from the very beginning? Well, there's Mary, there's Joseph. They're engaged, and she's a virgin. Like, that's what we got, right? So is that like, does that sound like a fairly good plan? It does, right? It sounds like they've got a plan. Like they've grown up to some degree. We know that they're, like Mary's on the young side by our standards, but she's grown up and she's done her thing, right? She's been an observant Jew. And we know that she's getting ready to get married. And you guys a lot of you remember what that time is like. Like there's all these plans that go into it. There's this wonder about the future. You start to strategize and you start to think about where you're going to live and how far out you're going to have kids or how far out you want to go without having kids. And if you're going to replace them for the first few years with a dog or a bunny. And what kind of, like let's pick this furniture set over, like all of these things go into it, right? Matthew and Luke, they both start us off. There's a well-made plan here. And they're happy about it, right? There's a woman, Mary, and there's a guy, Joseph, and they're thrilled. They're about to enter the rest of their lives together. But then this happens. Then this is where it gets super fun. Let's read Matthew. You guys are Matthew, right? Okay, I got it right this time. Okay, Carolyn, let's do it for real. Matthew, the second part of verse 18. Read that for us.
And his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit.
Oh my goodness. Like there's this great plan, right? And she's grown up and she's nailed every marker she's supposed to. And Joseph has developed a carpentry business and he's nailed every marker. But now we learn before this marriage happens, Mary is found to be pregnant. Let's look at the corresponding verse over here in Luke. Let's look at Luke 1:28. Wendy, are you up for reading that for me? Luke 1:28. Yes, chapter 1, verse 28. Okay, so there's a plan. It's going great. Now we learn that who shows up. Over here, God sent an angel of the Lord. Over here, we found out that she was what? That she's pregnant. But pregnant by who? The Holy Spirit. So who showed up in the midst of this really well-made plan? God did. God showed up, right? Everything was going great. And then God shows up. And isn't that the way life goes sometimes? Like the plans are all lined up. Everything's Everything's pinned to some sort of bulletin board and a calendar, and you've got everything set, and you're excited about it, and you've done everything right, too. Like on top of that, it's not like it fell together by accident, right? You've done your job to put everything in place, and then out of nowhere, God shows up, and boom, you're pregnant. And boom, God sends a messenger, and he says, Mary, God needs to talk to you. Here's what happens when that happens. Let's look at the Luke one first. By the way, before we do that, how does that feel? If you've been there, and you've got your plans, and then God shows up, how does that feel? What's that? Not good. You're like, I don't like it when God shows up. So, and when you say not good, what are the possibilities that you might feel? Okay. Surprised, frustrated are two things. If you've been there before, what else does it feel like? Out of control, right? Like I'm losing the handle on everything that I'd forecast. This is new and it's unexpected, and I don't know if I like it, or maybe I already know that I kind of don't like it because it's going to be cold in Massachusetts. So this is not according to plan. And what else does it feel like? Who else has been through a moment like that where the plan's made, God shows up, and there's some sort of frustration, unexpected, surprise, you're not quite sure if you like it? Let's see what it feels like for them. Let's look in Luke. Actually, Jamie, do you have your... Oh, but Tim's right next to you. Tim, would you read out, if you look in verse 30, you will see the very first thing that the angel says to Mary. What does he say to her? There you go. Now let's go over here in Matthew. If you look in Matthew, let's read the very first part of verse 20. Chuck, would you read that for us? The first thing that he says to Joseph. So, over here, Mary, do not be afraid. Over here, Joseph, do not be afraid. It's not like God doesn't know, right? That he shows up in the midst of life, in the midst of life rolling the way that it should, and then he drops a bomb into life, right? And as that bomb begins to fizzle, you begin to get a little bit anxious and a little bit nervous and a little bit afraid. And it's not like he doesn't know that he's about to invite you into this drastically new way of doing and being and thinking. It's not like he doesn't know that in his ongoing creative process, you will be caught to some degree off guard. And so both angels, both recipients of the message, are told from the very beginning, yes, I understand that this is going in a direction that you didn't anticipate. I understand that it goes against all of these things you've planned. I understand that you've grown up as observant Jewish kids. I understand that you're looking into a future where things might have been lined up for you. And I'm calling you to something different, new, extraordinary. So I'm calling you to experience God in a way that you haven't before. And that is downright scary. I completely understand that when I call you, you will be afraid. Do you guys see that? Have you guys ever been there? Here's what happened next. Joseph actually considered divorcing Mary. Quietly, because he was a virtuous man, he considered dropping out completely and bailing. Mary looks up and she says, how can this possibly be? This is not aligned with what I've looked at, and furthermore, I'm a virgin. Like this, what you're telling me, doesn't make sense. Both of them, for a moment at least, experienced some level of resistance to what was coming up in different ways. One One simply wanted to understand what was going to happen. One of them thought it was off, and he said, I'm out. Both of them were afraid. And then God shows up and he says, don't be afraid. I'm taking you into something new and different, but it's going to be full of life, because that's what happens when I renew things. And just when it looks like it's barren and empty, and just when it looks like that tree will never have life again, it's that barrenness, it's that cycle of renewal that actually brings new life in. And so don't be afraid. And Joseph replied with, okay, I don't quite know what's going on, but I'm going to take Mary as my wife, and I'm going to name the boy Jesus. Not only did he accept it, but he took full ownership of the change. Mary says, I don't know how this is going to happen, but whatever you want to happen, I'm in. I am 100% in. And that's the way that these cycles go. Now, here's the crux of it for me. Did God ever tell them that it was because they had done something wrong or because they had a bad plan? No. There was nothing wrong with their plan. There weren't indicators that things were going downhill. That is just the way that God works. God is constantly creating. Christians and churches should be constantly becoming. It's not because he says things are going downhill that I'm taking you into something new. He simply says, I'm taking you to something new, it's time to move. If things are going downhill, it's because we already missed the initial invitation. It's not because now he's doing something to save things and pull things out. It's because we were supposed to follow already. There's a question on the back of your communication card that I want to call attention to. So, in the midst of the babies, I'm going to give you guys about 60 to 90 seconds to think, to reflect. This will be on your own. And there's a couple questions that I want you to reflect on. One of the questions is this: how are you experiencing God's call into something drastically new? My second question is this: what kind of motivation do you need to accept and not be afraid? The third bullet point under your communication card has a question. And that's the last one I want to leave with you for these 90 seconds. What does it look like when you envision what the UCC community can become? So 90 seconds, quiet thoughts, and then we'll come back.
Morning. Is this mic on? We're good? was a Sunday in Lent in 2012 that Jennifer and I first visited the church that we were considering as we were beginning our search for a new church to worship in. We were in the worship service. The youth had been released to Sunday school. The choir had sung a couple of beautiful songs, and the minister was delivering his message. Somewhere 10 minutes in or so, some random guy came forward, sat down in front of a mic, and started talking to the congregation. Have you been there? In all seriousness, my name is Stephen Carlson. I'm a member at large on the board, and Arturo did ask me to come forward this morning and talk to you about my story, my journey of how I wound up here with you at UCC Medfield. My journey is not a solo journey. It's a journey that I took with my wife, Jennifer, and so it is really our story, but she has absolutely no idea what I'm going to say this morning. Before Jennifer and I met, we were both serving as youth leaders to senior high students in our respective churches. I was worshiping at the church that I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts. Jennifer was living here in Medfield, but worshiping at the church she grew up in Boston. And we both happened to take our students to a youth retreat, a week-long youth retreat in Fort Collins, Colorado. It was being hosted at the University of Colorado. Our students happened to be housed together in the same dormitory, and they very quickly got to know each other as two groups, given that they were both in Massachusetts all the way out in Colorado. And I think it was the second night that I went down to the stadium for the evening event, found my students. They were sitting with Jennifer's students, and the two groups had been kind enough to save us 2 seats right next to each other. Not being particularly subtle about their intentions, I remember they literally took us physically and led us to those seats and sat us down next to each other. I had not gone to Colorado that summer expecting to meet my future wife. I was there expecting to serve those students along their journey with God. Jennifer was there for the same reason with her students. But in that moment in time, he turned that story around on us and used those students as part of his plan, bringing Jennifer and I together, where our journey together began. God uses our young people sometimes in amazing and unexpected ways, doesn't he? Jennifer and I got married 2 years later. I moved to Medfield with her. We began worshiping together at her church in Boston. We eventually had 2 children, Andrew first, Kirsten second. We continued to worship at our church in Boston. It was a multi-generational church. It was a multi-ethnic church. They incorporated traditional sacred music along with contemporary praise music almost every single week. We loved our church. We had no intention or expectation of leaving it. But as our children were starting to get through grade school, it was becoming much more difficult for us to stay as actively involved in this church in Boston as we wanted our family to be. And so we began to question ourselves whether or not we were being called to actually leave that church and find a church closer to home. And in the middle of us having these questions, our senior pastor set up some small groups, much like Pastor Karen set up a few years ago. Jennifer and I joined one, and the pastor gave us the curriculum that he wanted us to study. It was a 4-week curriculum that was centered around intentionally choosing to worship and serve as a community. But in the first session, the presenter, in setting the context, said, God calls us to worship and serve in the community where we live, where we can have the greatest impact. And it became very clear to Jennifer and I that God was saying, I have a slightly different journey for you than what you expected. Trust me. And that Sunday in Lent was the first Sunday that we visited here at UCC Medfield. Nobody stole Phil's sermon that morning. But in September of 2012, we made the decision to start worshiping here on a regular basis. In January, we as a congregation are moving to a single worship service model. This move can create concerns for some people, it can create hopes for some people, it can create both for some people, and both are legitimate reactions. I have always viewed this church in this building here on Main Street in Medfield as really having two communities, an 11 o'clock community and a 9:30 community. I look at this move as an opportunity to bring those communities together where we can truly serve and worship as one unified community, and I am genuinely excited about it. Arturo left us with a question. It was, what does it look like when you envision our church growing as one community? My vision is that we will take this journey together with God leading us, and that perhaps He has something unexpected in store for us, something beyond what any of us are hoping or have thought about. Thank you. God is calling. Journey with us.
God is calling. God. From the introduction of God in the very opening of Genesis, He's moving over the surface of the waters. He's in constant movement. We go from that to a period where He takes a whole nation out of Exodus and they travel across a desert to a new land. The Ark of the Covenant itself, you know those loops that are intended to be on the sides of it? That was to drive a pole through so that they can carry the Ark. The Ark was where God was dwelling with His people. The people were never intended to stay still. In the design of everything that He gives them, from there to the birth of Jesus, in a narrative where there's a man and a woman whose plans are drastically changed. They need to travel from where they are to a different place. And then even once He's born, they have to travel to a different place. Jesus Himself, when He worked and walked and conducted His ministry, He never settled into a specific place. He was always on the move. God has a spirit that is constantly moving. And when we settle into a way of doing, we simply petrify His spirit, and eventually we evict it. And that's not what God wants for UCC Medfield. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the church that Steve and Jennifer left. In fact, they loved it. God was simply calling. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the nice little condo that we had in always 75 degrees Orange County. But what we thought is God is calling. And so in January, I'm going to come worship on January 6th at 10 a.m. with all of you. Not because I want to worship at a different time besides 9:30 or 11. Not because I want to worship in a sanctuary rather than a great room. Not because I'm tired of either contemporary modern music or because I want or am tired of more traditional choral music. It's not because of any of those things. I'm coming to worship because God is calling. Will you worship with us? With that, let's all stand together and sing Be Thou My Vision.